Chair now recognizes the representative from Michigan, Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. Merry Christmas, and appreciate your testimony. I am probably the least qualified person to opine on architecture and what what is artistic and aesthetic. I'm just an Army grunt, so I'll leave it to the professionals to make that determination. One interesting point I was thinking about is the last major restoration or renovation of the White House was about 75 years ago, and I think they tore it down to the wall studs and rebuilt entirely from the inside. And Mr. Chairman, my great-grandfather was actually on the commission that helped oversee that, 75 years ago, which was kind of interesting. But anyway, questions I had for you. When I heard we were having PBS in our hearing, I thought maybe we were all going to go viral today, but it turns out you're with a different PBS. So thank you for being here nonetheless. I wanted to ask, so I had a Social Security office in my district that closed for several months, was a lease building, and it felt like the property owner was not really diligently working in earnest to remedy the issues of concern there before the building and the office could be reopened. Do you feel that we have adequate enforcement capability with our, like the leased spaces that we have that are owned by a landlord? Do we have adequate leverage to make sure that they're enforcing their obligations appropriately?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. Yes, generally, I think we do have the right enforcement mechanisms embedded into our lease contracts to remedy issues such as that, in an expeditious manner. Unfortunate to hear about the Social Security office in your district, and I'd be happy to follow up with you to get more details and get a better understanding of what took place there and how we can make sure that it doesn't reoccur elsewhere.
Yeah, thankfully they've since reopened. Appreciate the work to get that done. But it did give me concern that if we were constantly in this dispute with a landlord with an important office that affects obviously constituents in my district, but could be equally applicable anywhere else in the country, that we want to make sure we have the appropriate negotiating leverage over the landlord for any leases that we're engaged in. I'm also curious to know, we talked a lot about deferred maintenance and how a lot of legacy buildings are going to cost a lot more to upkeep or renovate or build back into a condition of serviceability. So there's been a shift to kind of go into more leased spaces, which I think in today's evolving workforce environment might make a lot of sense, that we have a little bit more of a nimble ability then to scale up or scale down based on the needs that we have without owning the underlying assets. You pointed out some costs associated with that, kind of more startup costs maybe. Have you done, or has there been any analysis of kind of the break-even point? If we were to do everything that the three of you think may be necessary to get done to perfectly move into the right appropriate size space and maybe, shed off some of these legacy buildings that may not be necessary anymore, at what point do you think the taxpayers could break even on those lease spaces?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. We really look to analyze financially every one of those transactions that you just described, and typically we like to see that we are able to recoup throughout the firm term of the lease at least the amount of savings in terms of reduced rental costs to the taxpayer that it costs to move the tenant up front. So if it's going to cost $10 million to move the tenant out of a federal building into a lease space, we want to ensure that the government is going to save at least $10 million during the occupancy, of that lease. So that's one of the ways that we look at it.
Do you take into account, I assume if we vacate a building, do we sell that, or what happens to the building in the inventory, or is it like by the time it's in that condition, it's like when you try and trade in your car when you're in college and it's not worth anything anymore?
Every asset is different. There's usually a market for every one, but primarily the savings that we capture are associated with the deferred maintenance costs and the annual operating costs that the asset incurs related to janitorial services, keeping the lights and the heat and the cooling on, and the operations and maintenance of the mechanical plant.
Okay. My last question, Mr. Chairman. A lot of our federal buildings are historic in nature. If we have deferred and a lot of maintenance due on them, are we obligated by a lot of the historic preservation requirements to replace, the building facade with the exact same material that might be difficult to source, or can we be a little bit more pragmatic with how we do that?
I am not an expert on all of those details. I certainly have folks within our staff that are, but there are generally different approaches that you can take to mitigate different adverse impacts to a historic building, and we work closely with stakeholders such as state historic preservation officers, other consulting parties where applicable, to put those measures in place.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.